A queen who feared no one feared a girl with ink on her hands. A blade who never failed was sent to end her, and chose to fall instead. Some curses break with a kiss. This one needed more. We begin now. The mirror did not hang on any wall. It stood alone in the highest chamber of the Black Keep, taller than 2 men, its frame a tangle of silver thorns that had grown, not been forged, around a sheet of glass so clear it seemed less a mirror than a doorway into colder weather. No candle burned near it. It made its own pale light, the way deep water glows where no sun reaches, and that light moved across the stone floor in slow tides whenever someone climbed the long stair to consult it. Tonight, the someone was the Queen. Bellatrix came up out of the dark the way a flame climbs a wick, restless, all motion, her bare feet silent on the worn steps, and her black hair loose to her waist. She had been beautiful once, in the way a blade is beautiful, and she was beautiful still. But it was the loveliness of something that has decided never to age and pays for the decision in private. Rings crowded every finger. When she trailed her hand along the wall as she rose, the silver bit cold against her skin, and she pressed harder because the small cruelty of metal on bone was one of the few sensations that still reached her. She stopped before the glass and looked at herself for a long moment without speaking. The mirror showed her faithfully, the high cheekbones, the dark fever in the eyes, the mouth that knew its own power. She tilted her head. The reflection tilted back. She had done this 10,000 nights, and still the pleasure of it had not gone stale. "Glass," she said. Her voice in the empty chamber was low and almost tender, the voice a woman uses for a lover or a dog. "Tell me what you tell me." The surface clouded, the way breath clouds a window pane, then cleared. "You are the strongest witch beneath these stars," came the answer. It had no sound. It arrived behind the eyes, in the place where one's own thoughts live, so that every prophecy felt like something she had always privately known. "Your power has no equal among the living." She closed her eyes and let the words move through her like wine. No equal. She had spilled an ocean of blood to earn that sentence. She had unmade kingdoms, hollowed out her own family, traded her name for terror, and found the bargain fair. No equal among the living. And then, because she was clever, and because cleverness is a kind of self-harm, she opened her eyes and asked the question she should never have asked. "Among the living," she repeated softly. "Then there is someone, now or to come, someone the years will set against me." Her nails found the silver of a ring and turned it, until the band scraped a raw pink ring into her finger. "Show me, glass. Show me the one who could ever stand where I stand. Show me my enemy." The chamber went very still. The pale tide of light stopped moving across the floor. "You will not like it," the mirror said. "I have never once asked you to please me. Show me." The glass darkened to the color of a bruise, then opened. She saw a girl, not a queen, not a sorceress crowned in storm. A girl, no more than 17, sitting on a low stone wall at the edge of some nothing village, with a book open across her knees and her brown hair escaping its braid into the wind. There was ink on her fingers. There was a smudge of it on her cheek where she had pushed her hair back without noticing. She was frowning at the page the way some people frown at the sea, as though the world were a problem she fully intended to solve. Around her bare wrist, a thread of light flickered and died. A small spell, badly cast, a thing she was teaching herself with no one to teach her. She laughed at her own failure, alone, delighted, and tried again. Bellatrix stared. "That," she said at last, and the tenderness was gone from her voice, drained out of it like heat from a corpse. "That is what you set against me, a mud-blood child with grass stains on her hem." "You asked for your enemy," the mirror said, unmoved, "not for a worthy one. Power does not always arrive dressed for the occasion. She does not yet know what she is. Neither, once, did you." The Queen's hand came up. For an instant it looked as though she might strike the glass, drive her rings through it, send 1,000 silver splinters of her own face raining across the floor. The mirror did not flinch. It had been threatened by better. She let the hand fall. "How long," she said, "before she becomes this thing you promise me?" "Time is a river. She is upstream. But rivers run only one way, and they do not run slowly." "Then we will dam the river." Bellatrix smiled, and the smile was worse than the rage had been, because it had a plan inside it. "We will dam it at the source, while the source is small enough to close in one hand." She turned from the glass, her hair swinging, the cold light pouring off her shoulders like water. "Where?" "Beyond the white cliffs, beyond the sea road, past the last of your roads, in the low country between the forest and the foam." "Far," she murmured. "Conveniently far. Far enough that I should send someone whose loyalty I do not have to purchase." She was already at the door, already calling down the dark stair in a voice that woke the keep. "Draco, bring me my nephew. Bring me the prince." He came as he always came, without hurry, because hurry was for men who feared their queen, and Draco had been taught from the cradle to wear fearlessness like a second coat, whether or not he owned the first. He was tall and pale, and very young to be as dangerous as everyone agreed he was, with hair the colour of frost on a window pane, and grey eyes that gave away nothing, because he had practised year upon year in front of a mirror of his own, until nothing was the only thing they knew how to give. The court called him the Queen's hand. The court called him a great many things, most of them when he had left the room. He let them. A name you do not answer to cannot be used to lead you anywhere. He found Bellatrix in the throne room with the braziers banked low, pacing the length of the dais, and he understood at once that something had upset the architecture of her night. She was never still when she was afraid, and Bellatrix was almost never afraid, which made the rare sight of it instructive. "Aunt," he said, and inclined his head exactly as far as respect required, and not 1 degree further. "Sit. No, stand. I cannot bear anyone comfortable tonight." She rounded on him. "I have a task for you, and I would give it to no one else, because no one else would survive it, and because everyone else would lie to me about it afterward, and you, my darling boy, lie only about small things." Her eyes glittered. "There is a girl." Something in him went carefully blank. He had learned to do that too. "There are a great many girls, Aunt. Do not be charming. It bores me from you." She stopped before him, close enough that he could smell the bitter herbs she wore at her throat, the ones that kept the years off. "There is a girl beyond the white cliffs who will one day try to take everything I have built. The glass has shown her to me. A nameless thing? A peasant? Her lip curled around the word mudblood, and yet the mirror does not lie, and the mirror is afraid of her, and so, therefore, am I. She let that confession sit between them, monstrous and rare. I want her dead. He kept his face still. He was extraordinarily good at keeping his face still. But somewhere beneath the stillness, a small cold weight settled, the particular weight of an order that cannot be refused and should not be obeyed. You have 100 assassins. I have 100 liars with knives. I have one prince. She reached up and touched his cheek, and her rings were ice against his jaw, and he did not let himself pull away. Go to the Low Country. Find the girl. Make certain, Draco, that she does not live to see another spring. And then come home and tell me how she died, so that I may sleep. Her thumb pressed against the corner of his mouth. You will not fail me. You have never failed me. No, he said. I have never failed you. It was true. It was the truest thing in the room, and it tasted, for the first time in his life, like something he might come to regret. He left at dawn, alone, because she had not trusted the secret to an army. The road beyond the keep ran down through the burnt country, the lands her wars had emptied, where the only living things were carrion birds and the wind. He rode without seeing it. He had killed before. Of course, he had killed before. He was the Queen's hand. His hands were the reason for the name. But always there had been a reason that fit inside the killing. A soldier across a field, a traitor with a knife of his own. He turned the new task over and over as the leagues fell away, and however he held it, it would not fit. A girl with ink on her fingers, a girl the mirror fears for what she has not yet become. He was being sent to murder a possibility, to kill someone for a crime she had not committed and might never commit, on the word of a sheet of glass. He told himself it changed nothing. He had been raised by a woman who fed on fear in a court that ran on it, and he had long ago made his peace with the fact that mercy was a luxury for men who could afford the consequences. He could not afford them. There was nothing in his life that was his to risk. There was only the Queen and her favour, which was the thin ice he had spent 20 years learning to skate. And yet, by the time the white cliffs rose out of the haze on the third day, chalk pale, enormous, the sea breaking far below them in a sound like the world breathing, he had stopped telling himself anything at all. He had simply ridden and let the silence widen inside him, and listened to it the way he never let himself listen to anything. He left the horse at the cliff path and went down on foot into the green low country, into a softer world than he had ever been allowed, where the air smelled of salt and crushed grass and rain that had not yet fallen. The wind here was warm. There were larks. He found that he had stopped halfway down a hill, simply to watch the light move across a field, and he could not, for the life of him, have said how long he had been standing there. That was when he heard her. A voice, somewhere below him among the gorse, low and exasperated, and entirely unafraid. A girl arguing cheerfully with herself over a spell that would not come right. Again, the voice said, laughing, "Come on then, once more." A thread of badly made light flickered up over the yellow flowers and went out, and the voice laughed again at its own failure, delighted, undefeated, alive in a way he had never once in his guarded life permitted himself to be. Draco's hand was already on his wand. He had drawn it without deciding to. The order sat in him cold and complete. Make certain she does not live to see another spring. He took one step down the hill toward the sound, and then another, parting the gorse with his free hand, until he came around the shoulder of the slope and saw her. And she, hearing the grass move, lifted her head from her book and looked straight up the hill at him, brown eyes wide, ink on her cheek, the half-finished spell still glowing on her fingertips. For one heartbeat, neither of them moved at all. She moved first, not away. That was the thing he would remember later, turning it over in the dark like a stone worn smooth by handling. Anyone with sense would have run. The low country was open in every direction, and he stood above her on the hill with the wind at his back and a wand already loose in his hand. And any peasant girl with a grain of caution would have bolted for the gorse and the gullies. Instead, she stood, slowly, putting the book down on the wall behind her, with the care of someone setting aside something precious before a fight, and she lifted her own slim length of wood and pointed it at him, and her hand did not shake. "Stop there," she said, "whoever you are." He stopped, not from the command, from the voice, clear, level, with a tremor in it that was not fear, but the body bracing itself, the way a struck bell trembles before it rings. She had decided in the space of a breath that he was a threat and that she would meet it, and the speed of that decision told him more about what the mirror feared than 100 prophecies could have. "I mean you. No." The lie would not come. It sat behind his teeth, smooth and rehearsed and ready. The kind of lie he told a dozen times a day without a flicker. And for the first time in his life, it would not cross his tongue. He closed his mouth. Her eyes narrowed. They were the brown of strong tea held to the light, and they missed nothing. "You're not from here." It was not a question. "Your boots are wrong. Your hands are wrong. You've never worked a day, and you came down the cliff path, which means you came from over the cliffs, which means you came from her." The last word she said the way one says the name of a wasting illness. Her one tip rose a fraction. "She sent you." "No one sent me," he said, and that was a worse lie than the first, because she watched it leave him and watched it land, and he saw her file it away as proof. Liar. But she said it almost gently, almost with pity, and that undid something in him that her fear could never have touched. "I knew it would be a person in the end. I always thought it would be soldiers or one of her grey things in the night. I never thought she'd send something that looked like a boy and talked like a court." She tilted her head, studying him, and the wind pulled a strand of hair across her ink-smudged cheek. "Well, here you are. Get on with it then. I'd rather not stand in the cold while you find your nerve." It was the courage of it that disarmed him, not bravado, not the brittle defiance of someone hiding their terror behind a raised chin, but a real, settled willingness to die badly rather than to grovel for the privilege of dying well. He had grown up among people who would have offered him their kingdoms for one more hour of breath. He had never once stood across from someone who simply squared her shoulders and waited. "What's your name?" he heard himself say. "Why?" she shot back. "So you can tell her? So she has it for whatever she does with names?" "No." Her jaw set. "You'll have to kill a stranger. I won't make it tidy for her." "I'm not going to kill you." The words were out before the decision was. He felt the floor of his whole life shift beneath them as they fell. He had crossed a kingdom to do exactly that one thing, the single thing his aunt had asked, the thing he had never refused her, and he had just set it down in the grass between them like a sword he no longer wished to hold. She did not lower her wand. If anything, her grip tightened, the knuckles paling along the slim shaft. Don't. Her voice cracked on the word. Don't do that. Don't be kind. I can stand the other thing. I've been getting ready to stand the other thing for 2 years, ever since the dream started, ever since I knew. I cannot stand kind from her creature. It's a trick. It's the worst trick there is. A bright, furious shine had come up in her eyes, and she blinked it back with a sharp shake of her head, refusing it. What is it you want? Tell me what the trick is. I'd rather know. There's no trick. He took his hand off his wand. Slowly, so she could see it, he opened his fingers and let the wand drop into the gorse, and the small, soft sound of it landing was the loudest thing in the world. There, now I'm a man on a hill with nothing in his hands, and you've a wand pointed at my heart, and you could end this whenever you like. Is that trick enough? She stared at the discarded wand. She stared at him. Something moved across her face. Calculation, and beneath it a confusion she clearly hated. The look of a girl who had built her whole armor for one kind of weather and stood now in an entirely different storm. Pick it up, she said. No. Pick it up. I won't. Her breath came short. I won't strike an unarmed man. Do you understand me? I won't. That's hers. That's what she does. I won't be made into that just to live another day. Pick up your wand and fight me honestly. Or what? Some old reflex of arrogance surfaced, the court drawl he wore like skin, and he was almost grateful for it, because it was familiar, and the rest of this was not. You'll demand I let you kill me properly. You're a strange sort of quarry, mudblood. The slur was a mistake. He knew it the instant it left him. Felt it the way you feel a step that isn't there. The lurch of having said the cruel, automatic thing his whole world had taught him to say without ever once examining it. He watched it strike her, watched her flinch, then go very still, then harden, every soft, uncertain thing in her face closing over like ice across a pond. There it is, she said quietly. There's her boy. For a moment, She laughed, short and cold. Thank you. That makes it simpler. I didn't mean. You did. It's the only true thing you've said. She steadied her stance, and now her wand did not waver at all. I'm not going to wait for you to find your nerve again. I'm going to make you fight, and if you won't, I'm going to walk away. And if you follow me, I'll do what I have to do. I'm faster than I look, and I've nothing left to lose. And you've that soft look about the eyes of a man who's never wanted anything badly enough to ruin himself for it. So, the wind howled up the hill between them, flattening the gorse. Run, court boy, or pick up your wand. He did not pick up the wand. He should have. Every instinct beaten into him over 20 years screamed for the wand, for the familiar architecture of a duel, for the cold, clean grammar of attack and counter that he understood better than he understood his own heart. Instead, he stood empty-handed in the wind and looked at this furious, brilliant, doomed girl who would rather die in a fair fight than be spared by a coward. And he understood with a clarity that frightened him more than his aunt ever had, that he had already lost. Not the duel. The other thing. The thing that had no name yet and would ruin him before it was through. "My name is Draco," he said. She went still again. It was not what she had expected. "I didn't ask. You didn't. But you gave me yours just now without meaning to. You said, ever since I knew, and a girl who knows what she is a girl who's read every book she could steal trying to understand it. And a girl like that has a name she's proud of even when she's afraid." He took one step down the hill, into the range of her wand, into the place where she could have killed him with a word. "I crossed 3 days of dead country to find you. I won't tell you my aunt's name is a curse, because you know it better than I do. I'll only tell you this once, and you can believe it or not as you like. Whatever I came here to do, I'm not going to do it. Not because it's kind, because I find..." His voice caught an unfamiliar fault in the smooth stone of him. "That I can't." The wind dropped all at once, the way it does before rain, and in the sudden hush, he could hear her breathing, quick and shallow, and his own heart loud in his ears. "That's not how it works," she whispered. "She doesn't let people choose. You know that. You're hers. You'll wake up tomorrow and remember what you are, and you'll come back for me, and I'll have let my guard down because you stood on a hill and said you couldn't." A tear got past her at last, sliding through the smudge of ink on her cheek, and she did not wipe it away, would not give it that much. "I can't afford you, Draco. Whoever you are under there, I can't afford to believe you. Do you understand? It's the one thing in the whole world I'm not allowed." "I know," he said. "I know it is." And he did know. That was the unbearable part. He stood in the green low country with the salt wind in his teeth, and looked at the only person who had ever made him want to be something other than the blade his aunt had forged. And he understood that wanting it changed nothing about what he was, what he had been sent to do, what waited for them both across the white cliffs. He had thrown his wand into the gorse, and it had cost him nothing, because the real weapon had never been in his hand. A sound, then, far off, carried up from the trees that smudged the horizon to the north. A horn, low and long, and then another answering it, and a third. Hunting horns, or warning ones. Hermione's head snapped toward the sound. Whatever had passed between them on the hill, her body remembered first that it was being hunted, and the change in her was total and immediate. The dreamy, ink-stained girl gone, a cornered creature in her place, every line of her angled toward flight. "That's not you," she breathed. "You came alone." Her eyes flew back to his, and in them he saw the terrible new arithmetic running. "You came alone, but she never sends one knife when she can send 100. Did you know? Did you know they were behind you the whole time, herding me toward the cliffs while you stood here and made me?" No. The horns sounded again, closer, and now he could hear what was underneath them. The distant drum of hooves, many of them, fanning out across the low country in a wide cold net. His aunt had not trusted the secret to him after all. She had sent the prince to find the girl and sent the hounds to make certain of the prince. "Hermione, listen to me. There's no time. You have to." But she was already moving, already snatching her book from the wall and her courage from wherever she kept it, already turning to run. And he caught her wrist before he knew he meant to, his bare fingers closing around the thin, warm bones of it. And she froze. And for one suspended instant they both looked down at his hand on her skin, as though it belonged to neither of them. "Let go," she said. But she did not pull away, and he did not loosen his grip, and the horns sang their cold third note across the grass, while the two of them stood caught in the small, impossible fact of his hand around her wrist. "If you run north, they take you on the open ground before you reach the trees." He spoke fast and low. The court drawl burned away, every word stripped to bone. "If you run for the cliffs, they have men on the cliffs. There's one duel left to lose today, Hermione, and it's mine, and I need you to understand that when it starts, you don't watch it. You run. Do you hear me? Whatever you see, you run." She wrenched her wrist free at last, but the freeing of it was slower than her fury wanted, as though her own hand argued with her. "You expect me to believe you'll fight your own? I expect you to believe nothing." He bent and took up his wand from the gorse, and the familiar weight of it settled into his palm like a question he had finally decided to answer. Believe the trees instead. Get into the forest, and don't stop until something stops you, and pray that what stops you is kinder than what's behind. The first riders broke over the rise to the east, 3 of them, then 5, grey-cloaked, low in the saddle, and at the sight of the prince standing in the open beside the girl he had been sent to kill, the foremost reined up so hard his horse screamed and skidded in the turf. "My lord prince," the man's voice carried, wary, confused. "The queen bade us follow. The girl, is she—" "Dead," Draco said. "In a moment. Stand off. She's mine to finish." It was the right lie, the kind that bought a breath, and he saw the rider hesitate over it. But there were 5 of them, and more coming, and his aunt's hounds were not fools, and the second man had already noticed what the first had missed, that the doomed girl still had a wand in her fist, that no killing curse had been cast, that the prince stood between the riders and their quarry rather than beside them. "She's armed, my lord," the second man said slowly, "and alive. And you've not—" "Now," Draco said, to Hermione, not to them, and the world came apart. He moved before the riders could finish thinking, and 20 years of his aunt's brutal tutelage came out of him in one bright, merciless ribbon of fire. He had never fought to lose before. He discovered, in the doing of it, that fighting to lose well is harder than fighting to win, because you must be good enough that no one suspects the choice, and you must choose anyway, again and again, in the half-second the body screams to live. He took the first rider clean off his horse and the second after him, and he let the third's hex graze his shoulder when he could have turned it, and the pain of it was almost a relief, a thing he could feel that was simpler than everything else. "Run!" he roared, and did not look to see if she obeyed, because looking would cost him the half-second, and he gave the half-second to the fight instead. She ran. He knew it the way you know weather changing at your back, a lightening, an absence, the space where she had been suddenly only wind. Good girl, brilliant girl, go. A blade of green light came for his throat, and he bent under it and answered with white. And somewhere in the churn of horses and grey cloaks, he was distantly, savagely glad, because every second he stood here bleeding was a second she was farther into the green country, closer to the trees, closer to the only people he knew of who hated his aunt enough to die for a stranger. But the net was wide, and he was one man, and he had not been sent to win. A hex took him in the ribs and folded him over his own breath. Another caught the back of his knee. He went down into the trampled gorse with a taste of copper in his mouth, and the grey riders wheeling above him, and through the forest of horse legs he turned his head and found her. Far off now, a small dark figure flying through the long grass toward the trees, her hair streaming loose, her stolen book clutched to her chest like a heart she would not leave behind. She had stopped. At the edge of the trees, with safety 3 strides away, she had turned, and she was looking back across the whole cold distance at the boy lying broken in the grass who had thrown the jewel to give her the running of it. Don't, he thought, with everything he had left. Don't you dare. Don't waste it. Go. He could not say it aloud. He had no breath for it, so he did the only thing his ruined body would still do. He lifted one hand off the bloodied ground, palm out, and made of it a single command in a language older than any kingdom. Go, go, live, go. And whether she understood the gesture, or only understood at last that there was nothing she could do, he saw her break, saw the cry he couldn't hear tear out of her. And then the trees took her, and she was gone, and the riders were hauling him up by the collar with their wands at his throat. My lord. The captain's face swam over him, white with the particular fear of a man who has just watched the Queen's nephew let the Queen's enemy walk free, and who knows that he will have to be the one to tell her. What have you done? Draco spat blood into the grass and found, somewhere under the wreckage, the cold, smooth court mask he had worn his whole life. He put it on. It still fit. I've done nothing yet, he said, but you've done a great deal. You rode down on my kill before I'd made it. You spooked her into the trees with your horns, and you're shouting like a pack of village boys after a rabbit. He let his voice go flat and dangerous, his aunt's voice, the one that emptied rooms. She'll die in that forest, Captain. There's nothing in there but wolves and worse, and a wounded girl with no provisions and no road won't last 3 nights. But if the Queen asks why her hand came home empty-handed, you'll tell her it was your horns that broke the hunt, won't you? He watched the man weigh it, watched fear do its slow arithmetic. The captain had ridden out to make certain the prince did his work, and instead the prince was bleeding, and the girl was loose in the deep wood, and the only story that did not end with the captain's own death was the story the prince was handing him, that the hunt had been botched by over-eager men, that the girl had fled to a forest that would finish her for them, that no one need ever admit a wand had been thrown into the gorse on a green hill. "Aye, my lord," the captain said at last, very quietly. "It was the horns. It was the horns." Draco let them take his weight because his legs would not. "Now get me onto a horse. We've a long ride home and a queen to disappoint." The forest closed over Hermione like dark water. She ran until the running was no longer a choice. Until her legs moved on some animal contract her mind had no part in, branches whipping her arms and roots reaching for her ankles, and the light failing fast under the heavy crowns of trees older than the kingdom that hunted her. She ran until the horns behind her thinned to nothing, and then she ran further because the silence frightened her more, and at last she fell, simply fell, her body spending the final coin of itself into a hollow between the roots of an enormous oak, and lay there with her cheek in the cold leaf mould and her stolen book still crushed against her chest, and shook. He let me go. She did not want it to be true. She turned it away from her even as it pressed close, because believing it was the one luxury she had sworn never to allow herself, and because the alternative, that one of the Queen's creatures had looked at her across a hill and chosen her over his own life, broke a rule she had needed to survive. People did not do that. Not for her. Not for a nameless mudblood girl the world had been trying to be rid of since she was old enough to know the word. Kindness from that quarter was a snare. She had told him so herself. And yet she had seen him go down, seen him take the hex he could have turned, seen the hand come up off the bloody ground, go, live, go, and seen, in the last instant before the trees swallowed her, that he had spent himself to make her run, and that he had known he would. Draco, she said, to no one, to the leaf mould, testing the strange shape of the name in her mouth. It tasted of iron and salt, and something she had no word for and was afraid to learn. Above her, far up through the black lattice of branches, the sky had gone the colour of a healing bruise, and as she watched, the first heavy drop of rain found its way down through all those leaves and broke cold against her upturned cheek. Then another. Then the sky opened in earnest, and the storm came down over the forest in long grey ropes, hissing on a million leaves, and the wind rose with it from nowhere, from everywhere, until the whole wood roared. She did not know, could not have known, that the storm was his, that 100 leagues behind her, slumped bleeding against the neck of a borrowed horse, a pale boy with grey eyes had reached up into the failing weather with the last of his strength, and pulled, dragging the clouds together with a wandless will that would have killed a lesser wizard, sealing the sea road behind her in spray and the mountain passes in falling stone, so that the only road left open to a fleeing girl ran deeper and deeper into the trees, to the 7 hidden hearts of the forest who would take her in. She only knew that the rain had come, and that she was alive, and that somewhere a boy had thrown his wand into the gorse rather than kill her. She pulled herself up against the great oak's flank and turned her face into the wild, wet dark, and through the roar of the storm she heard, very faint and very near, the sound of footsteps, many of them, careful, circling closer through the trees, and a low voice that was not unkind, asking who, in the name of all that was hidden, had sent the Queen's own weather to drive a child to their door. There were 7 of them, and they came out of the rain like figures stepping forward from behind a curtain of beads, one and then another, until the small wet hollow where she huddled was ringed with shapes that did not mean her harm. She knew it the way a hunted thing knows the difference between a hand raised to strike and a hand raised to shelter. Knew it before she could have said how, in the set of their shoulders, in the lowered wands, in the careful distance they kept, so as not to crowd a creature already half mad with running. The one who spoke was old and broad, with a beard like a thundercloud and eyes that had clearly wept and laughed in roughly equal measure across a long life. He crouched at the edge of the oak's roots, slow, the way you approach a wounded deer, and he held out one enormous hand, palm up, with nothing in it. "There now," he said. The rain ran off the brim of his hat in a silver curtain. "There now, lass. You're at the end of the road, and the road's a friend here, whatever it was where you came from. Nobody's hunting in this wood that we don't let hunt. Can you stand?" She could not, but she tried, out of pride, and the trying spent the last of her, and she pitched forward, and the old man caught her as though she weighed nothing, gathered her up out of the cold leaf mould the way one gathers a sleeping child, and turned with her into the storm. The other 6 closed around them as they walked, a moving wall of cloaks and quiet, and the last thing she saw before her eyes dragged themselves shut was the strangest of all the strange things of that strange day. The rain, where it touched the 7 of them, seemed to thin and warm, as if even the Queen's wild weather grew gentle in their keeping. She woke in firelight, a low room, round, dug half into the living root of some vast tree, the ceiling ribbed with timber and hung with drying herbs that turned the air green and sweet. A fire muttered in a stone hearth. She was dry. Someone had wrapped her in wool that smelled of wood smoke and lavender. Her stolen book sat on the table beside the bed, its warped pages fanned open to dry, tended by a hand that had understood without being told that the book mattered. For a long while she only lay there and breathed, and let the impossible fact of being warm and unhunted move through her like a slow tide. "You talk in your sleep," said a voice. A woman sat by the fire, younger than the old man, sharp-featured, with grey-threaded early through dark hair and a healer's stillness about her hands. She did not look up from the herbs she was binding. "You said a name," the woman went on, mild, "perhaps 100 times, over and over, all through the worst of the fever. Draco." Now she did look up, and her eyes were kind and entirely without mercy, the eyes of someone who has learned that the truth is the only medicine that does not wear off. "It's the Queen's nephew's name, the Prince, the Hand. So before we feed you, child, and before we love you, and we will love you, it's the curse of this house that we cannot help it. You're going to tell me why a girl the Queen wants dead spent a whole night of fever crying out for the very blade she sent." Hermione's fingers found the edge of the wool blanket and held it. "He let me go." The woman's hands went still. "He was sent to kill me. He stood on a hill, and he could have. And then he—" Her voice frayed. She steadied it, the way she had taught herself to steady everything, alone, for years. He threw his wand into the grass. He fought his own riders so I could run. The last I saw of him, he was on the ground, and he lifted his hand to tell me to keep running. And I think—" She stopped. The next words cost more than all the running had. "I think the storm was his. I think he made it to drive me here, to you, because he knew you'd—" She gestured weakly at the warm green room, the fire, the dried and tended book. "Because he knew." The woman was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the rain had softened to a steady whisper on the leaves. "Then he's not what we thought," she said at last, slowly, as though laying down a long-held weight. "And that is either the best news this house has had in 20 years, or it is a trap so deep we'll not see the bottom of it until we're standing in it. She set the herbs aside and came to the bedside and laid the back of her cool hand against Hermione's brow, and her sharpness gentled. You're past the fever. You'll mend, and you'll be safe here as long as the trees stand, which is longer than the Queen will. I promise you that. A pause. But you'll mend faster if you stop guarding that name like it might be stolen. It's only a name. Whatever he did, he's 100 leagues away in a black keep, and you're here, and here you'll stay. She did not say, and you'll forget him. She was too wise to say a thing so plainly untrue. The days folded into weeks, and the weeks taught Hermione what it was to be kept rather than hunted. The Order of Seven, for that was what the wood called them, in the hushed way one speaks of weather that might overhear, were the last free hearts of a kingdom Bellatrix had emptied. A healer, a tracker, a maker of small wild magics, an old man who had once advised a king now 20 years dead, a brother and sister who finished each other's spells, a silent boy who had not spoken since the soldiers came to his village, but who left wildflowers on the window-sill of the round green room every morning without ever being seen to do it. They had hidden in the deep woods so long that hiding had become a kind of home, and into that home they took the ink-stained girl with the warped book and the dangerous name on her lips, and they did the most subversive thing a band of the hunted can do. They let themselves be glad of her. And she, slowly, against every law of survival she had written for herself, let herself be glad in return. She had been alone so long that she had stopped feeling the shape of it. Now, surrounded, she felt the old solitude lift off her like a coat she'd forgotten she was wearing, and the lightness of it frightened her almost as much as it healed her. She learned the spells she had been teaching herself badly from her one stolen book, and learned them properly from people who knew. She grew strong in the legs and clear in the eye. She laughed, really laughed, head back, undefended, for what she could not remember as the first time, but which felt like a first time, and caught the healer watching her with something soft and sorrowful in her face, and did not understand the sorrow until much later. But there were the nights. The body mends faster than whatever it is in us that does the remembering. By day, she was the wood's bright pupil, but in the dark of the round room, with the fire banked low and the wildflowers wilting on the sill, the same thought came for her every night and would not be reasoned away. He threw his wand into the grass. He lifted his hand off the ground. And, deeper, a thing she had told no one and could barely tell herself, that on the hill, in the long instant before the horns, before the slur, before the running, when his bare fingers had closed around her wrist, and they had both looked down at his hand on her skin as though it belonged to neither of them, something in her had reached back. Some traitor part of her, starved of every gentleness, had turned toward him the way a plant turns toward light, before she had given it leave. She pressed the heel of her hand hard against her own breastbone in the dark, as though she could hold the feeling still or crush it. "I cannot afford you," she had told him. It had been true. It was still true. He was the Queen's, and she was the Queen's death, and there was no green hill in any kingdom where the two of them could stand together for longer than a horn blast. She knew this with the cold completeness of a girl who had survived by knowing the true shapes of things. And yet, lying in the warm dark of the only safety she had ever owned, surrounded for the first time in her life by people who would die before they let the world have her, Hermione Granger pressed her hand to her chest and discovered that the thing she could least afford was the thing she could not stop, and that somewhere far to the north, beyond the sealed sea road and the fallen passes, a boy with grey eyes had spent his whole strength to give her exactly this, a life she could not fully feel, because the better part of her had stayed behind on a hill in the grass looking back. 100 leagues to the north, the boy with grey eyes knelt on cold stone before a glass that made its own pale light and lied for his life. "Dead," he said. "I finished her at the wood's edge and left her for the wolves. Your captain will tell you the hunt was clumsy, and it was. But it was clumsy in the way a closing trap is clumsy. She ran exactly where I drove her, into a forest with no road out, wounded, with winter coming. She is as dead as if I'd burned her aunt. Deader. The wolves are thorough where I might have been merciful." Bellatrix circled him slowly, her bare feet silent on the stone, her rings catching the mirror's cold light. He kept his eyes down, kept his breathing even, kept the mask seated over the place where the truth lived. He had been lying to this woman since before he could walk. It was the first skill she had ever taught him, and he had learned it, as he learned everything she taught perfectly. "You're hurt," she observed. A long, crusted line scored his cheek. He had not let the healers touch it. "She marked you. She fought. The mirror wasn't wrong about her spirit." He let a thin edge of contempt into the words, the contempt she expected, the contempt that proved he had felt nothing else. "It cost me. It cost her more." She stopped behind him. He felt her hand descend onto his hair, cold and light, and it took everything he had not to flinch, because he knew that hand, knew its weight when it was pleased, and its weight when it was deciding. Just now, he could not tell which. "My good boy," she murmured. "My loyal hand." Her fingers tightened just slightly in his hair. "You know what would happen, Draco, if you ever lied to me. You know it better than anyone alive, because you've watched it happen to others." A pause that lasted a year. "But you've never failed me, have you?" "No, Aunt," he said. "I have never failed you." He felt her hand lift away, heard her turn back to the mirror, satisfied, or near enough to satisfied, that the difference would buy the girl a season, a year, perhaps longer. Long enough, he prayed to nothing in particular, for the trees to do what trees do, and grow over the place where Hermione Granger had been, and hide her so completely that even a glass that never lied might lose her in the leaves. He rose and bowed, and walked out of the chamber of cold light with his ruined face composed, and his heart slamming against his ribs, and he did not let himself breathe until the door had closed behind him. And in the chamber he had left, the Queen turned to her glass and said, idly, the way one asks after old gossip, "And the mud-blood child, show me her bones." And the mirror, which could not lie, clouded and cleared, and did not show her bones at all. The mirror showed a girl by a hearth in a round green room, laughing with her head thrown back, the firelight warm on a face that bore no mark of wolves. For the length of 3 slow breaths, Bellatrix did not move at all. Then her hand closed around the nearest ring and turned it and turned it, the silver band grinding a raw groove into her finger, and the small private pain of it was the only thing in the chamber that moved. Alive, she said. It was barely a word. Living, laughing. In a wood I cannot see the floor of, surrounded by. The image widened, and she counted them, the 7 shapes that ringed the fire, by the rats, the ones who slipped my nets 20 years gone, the ones I told myself the years had buried. A sound came out of her then that was not quite a laugh, and not quite anything human. He looked me in the eye and named her dead. My hand, my good boy who has never failed me. He has never failed you in the way you taught him to understand failure, the mirror offered, with the cold neutrality of a thing that takes no side because it has no stake. He has failed you in a way you never thought to forbid. Be silent. You asked once for your enemy. You did not ask whether you might make a second of your own blood, that you did unaided. I said, be silent. The Queen's voice cracked across the chamber, and for an instant her hand rose toward the glass as it had risen the first night. And again she let it fall, because the mirror was the one thing in her kingdom she could not afford to break, the one voice that never flattered her into ruin. She pressed both hands flat against her own face instead, and stood very still, breathing through her fingers, and when she lowered them, she had put the rage away somewhere deep, the way she put everything away that she meant to use later, cold. He drove her there, she said slowly, working it out aloud, walking the circle of her own keep with her hair swinging. The storm, the botched hunt. He drove her to the only people in this kingdom who would lay down their lives for a stranger. That was not mercy. Mercy is a flinch. This was made, planned. He thought past the hour, my clever boy. He thought past me. Something almost like pride moved across her ruined beauty and was uglier than the rage had been. He loves her, doesn't he? My own Draco. He went to kill the one thing that could unmake me, and he came back in love with it. The mirror said nothing, which was its way of saying yes. Then I cannot send him. She had reached the window now, the high black window that looked north over the burnt country, toward the white cliffs and the green low land and the deep wood beyond. All the long miles her enemy had fled across. Send the hand against the heart he's given away, and the hand turns in mine. No, some things a queen must do herself. She smiled at the dark glass of the window, at her own reflection laid over the northern night. It has been an age since I went hunting. I had forgotten how it sharpens the blood. She turned from the window, and her mind was already moving along its cold, familiar grooves, toward the locked cellar where the old potions slept under dust, toward a recipe she had not brewed since she was young and frightened, and learning what fear could be made to do. A draught to peel the face from the bones and lay another over them. To walk into a wood full of wary hidden hearts, not as the queen they had spent 20 years learning to flee, but as some harmless thing they would never think to bar the door against. An old woman, a peddler, a friend, and the boy, she murmured, pausing at the head of the long stair, stays here where I can see him, believing he has won her a season. Let him keep his pretty secret. Let him sleep at night thinking the trees have hidden her. Her smile widened in the cold light. It will be such a comfort to him later to know exactly how thoroughly he failed. Draco did not sleep. He had told himself the lie would buy a season, and a season was a great deal, and he should have been able to rest inside the breathing room of it. Instead, he lay in the dark of his cold high chamber and stared at the carved ceiling, and could not make his body believe the thing his mind had bought. Some animal under his ribs knew. Some part of him that had grown up in this keep, in the weather of his aunt's moods, had felt the silence that followed his bow grow a half-degree too still, and would not be reasoned out of its dread. He had done the only thing there was to do, and he turned it over endlessly in the dark, looking for the flaw. He had not been able to kill her. That was the first fact, the immovable one, the flaw beneath all the others. From the moment she had stood up off that wall and pointed her wand at him with her hand not shaking, the killing had become impossible, not as a matter of will, but as a matter of fact, the way it is a fact that water runs downhill. He had spent his whole life as a blade, and discovered on a green hill that a blade can refuse the hand. So he had done the next thing, and the next, each choice narrowing to the only choice, until there was nothing left to do but lie his way home and pray the woods swallowed her name. She looked back. That was the splinter he could not work free. At the edge of the trees, with her life 3 strides away, she had turned and looked back at him across the whole cold field, and he had lifted his ruined hand to drive her on, and he did not know, would never know now, whether she had understood it, whether the last thing she carried into the dark was the truth of him, or only the wreck of one of the Queen's creatures bleeding in the grass. He found he could not bear not knowing. He, who had built a life out of giving nothing away and asking for nothing back, lay in the dark and ached to know whether a girl he would never see again had understood him for one instant before the trees took her. This was the new country he lived in now, and it had no maps. He had wanted things before: favor, safety, the cold approval of a woman who fed on fear. But he had wanted them the way a soldier wants ground, strategically, for what they kept him from losing. He had never once wanted a thing simply because the wanting filled him and would not be put down. He did not know how to hold it. It frightened him more than his aunt's hand in his hair had frightened him, because his aunt he understood, and this he did not. And a thing you do not understand can lead you anywhere. He rose before dawn and went to the window, the great north window of his own chamber that gave onto the same dark country his aunt's window gave onto. And he stood there with his bandaged ribs aching and looked toward the wood he could not see. "Stay hidden," he told her, across all the leagues, knowing she could not hear, needing to say it anyway. "Stay hidden and grow into whatever the mirror is so afraid of, and be the thing that ends her, and never once think of me, because thinking of me is the one thing that could undo it." He pressed his forehead to the cold glass. "I gave you a season. Use it to forget my name." He did not know that 100 leagues south, in a round green room, a girl was pressing her own hand to her own breastbone in the dark, trying and failing to do exactly that. He did not know that in the cellar 2 floors below him, by the light of a single guttering flame, his aunt was already grinding the first bitter root of a potion that would peel the face from her bones. The Order felt the wood change before they understood it. It was the silent boy who knew first, the one who left wildflowers and had not spoken since the soldiers came. He stopped leaving them. For 3 mornings, the windowsill of the round green room was bare, and on the 4th, Hermione found him standing at the edge of the clearing, rigid, staring north through the trees at something none of the rest of them could see. His small hand white-knuckled around a stem he had picked and forgotten to set down. "What is it?" the healer asked him, low, though she knew he would not answer. "What do you hear?" He did not answer. He turned and looked at her, and then at Hermione, and his eyes, old in his young face, the eyes of a child who had watched a village die, were full of a terror so complete it had gone past fear into a kind of stillness, and he lifted his free hand and pointed north, the way Hermione had once seen another hand point weeks ago across a field. Only that hand had said, "Go, live." This one said something else. The healer went very pale. The old man came out of the tree-root house with his thundercloud beard and his ancient wand, and stood beside the boy. And the 2 of them, the eldest and the youngest, looked north together into the wood, while the autumn light slanted gold and ordinary through the leaves. "Something's coming," the old man said. He did not raise his voice. He had advised a king once. He knew the uselessness of fear loudly spoken. Or someone. The wood's gone quiet the way it goes quiet before a thing it doesn't have a name for. He turned to Hermione, and for the first time since they had carried her in out of the rain, the kindness in his face had a flaw of iron beneath it. "Lass, you'll not laugh by the fire tonight, nor any night until I say. You'll stay inside the wards. You'll keep your wand on you sleeping and waking, and you'll trust nothing that walks into this clearing on 2 legs and asks to be let near you. Nothing, do you hear? Not the most harmless grandmother in the world, not a starving child, not a peddler with a tray of pretty things. Nothing." "You're frightening her," the healer said. "Good," said the old man. "Let her be frightened. Frightened is alive." He laid his great hand on the silent boy's shoulder, and the boy leaned into it, still staring north, still pointing, and at last let the forgotten flower fall from his fingers to the leaf mould. "She found us once before any of us could see her coming. Pray she shows the same courtesy, because something is walking toward this wood that the trees themselves are afraid of, and I have lived a long time, and I have only ever known one thing the trees were afraid of, and I had let myself believe she had forgotten we existed. The flower lay in the leaves where the boy had dropped it. Far to the north, where none of them could see, the autumn wind shifted and carried down through all the miles of trees the faintest thread of a smell that did not belong to any wood, bitter root and ash, and the cold mineral tang of a potion just come to the boil. But the thing about a wood that has hidden you and warmed you and let itself love you is that it teaches the body to unclench. For all the old man's iron, the days kept coming gold and ordinary, and the gold and ordinary days did their patient work, and the fear the silent boy had pointed north could not stay sharp forever against so much quiet. This is not a failing of the careful. It is only the price of being alive, that you cannot hold a blade at your own throat every hour and still call the holding a life. Hermione kept her wand on her sleeping and waking, as she'd been told. She stayed inside the wards, but she also, as the weeks turned and nothing came down out of the north but leaves, began again to laugh by the fire, because the healer had been right on the first night. It was the curse of that house that they could not help loving, and the loved cannot stay frightened of the people who love them. And it was in those weeks, between the fear and the forgetting, that her body began to tell her a thing her mind had not let itself know. She noticed it the way one notices weather. Small signs, dismissed, accruing. A tiredness that sleep did not mend. A sudden treachery of the stomach at the smell of the morning fire, the very smell that had meant safety to her since the night they carried her in. A tenderness, a fullness, a strange new tilt to her own body that she put down to the mending, to the good food, to being kept for the first time in her life. She was a clever girl, the cleverest the mirror had ever feared, and she went on not knowing for far longer than her cleverness should have allowed, because the not knowing was easier, and because the knowing led somewhere she had locked a door against. It was the healer who said it, of course. The healer who missed nothing, who had watched Hermione refuse the morning fire 3 days running and turn grey at the smell of it. She did not say it cruelly. She set down her herbs, and she came and sat on the edge of the round green room's narrow bed, where Hermione lay with her arm over her eyes, and she took the girl's wrist in her 2 cool hands the way she had that first night, reading what the body said before the mind would. "How long?" the healer asked quietly. "Since you bled, child." The arm came off Hermione's eyes. She stared at the timbered ceiling, at the drying herbs, at the green sweet air, and the floor of her whole world tilted slowly under her like a boat coming off the sand. "I don't," she began, and stopped because she did. She had been counting without counting, the way the body counts, and the number had been waiting at the edge of her thoughts for weeks, patient, refusing to be added up. She added it up now. It was a number that had a hill in it, a hill and a wand thrown into the gorse, and a night. A night. She had told no one about the night. She had told them about the duel, the riders, the storm, the running. She had told them everything except the hours before the horns, the hours between the slur he'd thrown at her and the hooves on the wind, when the green country had gone quiet and the light had gone long and gold, and a boy who had crossed 3 days of dead country to kill her had instead sat down in the grass beside her and talked and gone on talking until talking became something else, became the only warmth she had ever in her life been given freely, and the only warmth she had ever, even once, reached out and taken. She had folded that night up small and hidden it from everyone, even from herself, because it was the one thing that proved she could not afford him, and a girl surviving cannot keep proof of what she cannot afford. She had hidden it so well, she had nearly hidden it from her own body. Her body had not been fooled. "Oh," Hermione said, "just that." The whole of it in one small sound. The healer's hands tightened on her wrist, and her sharp face did something complicated. Sorrow and tenderness, and a kind of fierce protective fury all at once. "The prince," she said. It was not a question. "On the night, before you ran." And when Hermione's face crumpled, The healer gathered her up against the wood smoke and lavender wool of her shoulder, the way the old man had gathered her up out of the rain, and held her while the locked door came off its hinges at last, and everything behind it came out in a flood. There now, lass. The body keeps the things the heart's too frightened to. It always has. I told him I couldn't afford to believe him. Hermione wept into the wool. I told him on the hill. I told him, I can't afford you. You're the one thing in the world I'm not allowed. And then he sat down in the grass, and he wouldn't go, and he wouldn't kill me, and he just talked. He talked like he'd never once in his life been allowed to say a true thing out loud, and her hands fisted in the wool. I knew it was the worst trick there is. I knew, and I reached for him anyway. I reached back, and then the horns came, and he made me run, and I've spent every night since telling myself it didn't happen, that I imagined it, that I couldn't possibly have with her creature. And now, the healer said gently, it's not a trick anymore. Tricks don't grow. Hermione went very still against her shoulder. It's real, the healer said, into the green, sweet dark of the round room. It's the realest thing that's ever happened to you, I'd wager, judging by the way you've hidden it. And it doesn't care a whit who his aunt is, nor what you can or can't afford, nor whether the timing is the worst in the history of the world. Which it is, child. I'll not pretend otherwise. She drew back and held the girl's face in her two cool hands and looked at her, fierce. But you listen to me. You are not alone. Do you understand? Whatever this is, whatever comes of it, you do not face it the way you faced everything before us. There are 7 of us between you and the whole cruelty of the world, and there will be an 8th before the spring, and not one of us will let the Queen's shadow fall across either of you while we draw breath. Now stop weeping. You'll make yourself sick, and you've 2 to keep well now. She kept it from the others only a little while. The old man knew within the week he had advised a king. He could count, and he did not say a word about the prince, nor about what it meant that the child the mirror feared was now carrying a child of the Queen's own blood, the great-grandchild of houses that had spent themselves making her. He only built sturdier rail along the loft stair, and took to walking the wards twice as often, and grew quieter and watched the north. The silent boy began leaving 2 flowers on the windowsill, and Hermione changed. Not in the way she had feared, not into something smaller, more frightened, more hunted. The opposite. The carrying of it steadied her, the way ballast steadies a ship, gave the loose terror of her life a centre and a weight. She stopped lying in the dark, crushing her own heart against her breastbone. She let herself, in the privacy of the round green room, lay one hand low against her own body and think of grey eyes, and a hand lifted off the bloody ground, and instead of the old cold refrain, "I cannot afford you," she found a new and dangerous one rising to take its place. You gave me this. Whatever else you were, whatever else you are. You sat in the grass and gave me the only warmth I'd ever taken, and then you spent your strength to keep it safe, and you don't even know it exists. She would tell him. She decided it in the dark one night, fierce and certain, the kind of certainty that had nothing to do with whether it was possible. Somehow, someday, when the wood had grown over them both, and the queen had crumbled into the dust the mirror promised, she would find a way to put a child into the arms of the boy who had thrown his wand into the gorse, and watch his careful, guarded face come apart and say, "Here, this is what came of the night you wouldn't kill me. This is what your mercy made." It was the first time in her life she had let herself want a future instead of merely surviving toward one. The wanting frightened her, the way it had frightened him in his cold high chamber 100 leagues away, though neither knew the other was frightened by the same thing in the same season. But she held the wanting anyway. She held it the way she held the child, close and warming, and refusing every law of survival that said she ought to set it down. Autumn deepened toward winter. The gold days shortened. The wood drew its old magic close around the clearing like a cloak, and the 7 hidden hearts kept their watch, and the 8th grew quietly under Hermione's heart through the long darkening. And for a little while, a few short weeks, the only such weeks she had ever owned, the girl the queen wanted dead was, against all the odds and all the laws, almost happy. It could not last, of course. They all knew it could not last. The old man knew it, watching the north. The healer knew it, binding her herbs. The silent boy knew it best of all, leaving his 2 flowers, staring at something through the trees that drew, week by week, imperceptibly nearer. It came on a still grey morning at the very edge of winter, when the first thin snow had dusted the clearing, and the wood lay hushed and white and breathless. It came up the only road, slow, leaning on a stick, an old woman bent under a peddler's tray, her face a map of harmless years, calling out in a cracked, sweet voice that she had ribbons and needles and trinkets, and, oh, such apples, such fine red apples, the last of the season. Would the pretty young miss by the fire not come and take just one? A gift from a poor old woman to a kind young face, on a cold morning, for nothing, for the simple love of a kind young face. And Hermione, who had been told to trust nothing on 2 legs that asked to come near her, not the most harmless grandmother in the world, looked up from the fire, one hand resting low and warm against the child she carried, and saw, leaning on a stick at the edge of the white clearing, the most harmless grandmother in the world. She did not go to her. That was the thing Bellatrix had not reckoned on, that the girl by the fire had spent her whole life learning the true shapes of things, and that no draught of bitter root could disguise a shape from someone who had survived by reading them. Hermione looked at the harmless grandmother leaning on her stick at the edge of the white clearing, and something old and animal under her ribs went cold and still, and her hand, without her telling it to, slid from the warmth of her own belly to the wand at her hip. "That's close enough," she said. The old woman's cracked smile did not falter. "Ah, but it's a long road, miss, and these old legs—" "Then rest your old legs where you stand. We've a well and a fire for any honest traveller, and one of the household will bring it out to you, but you'll come no nearer the house." Hermione kept her voice level, kept her wand low, kept her eyes, and this was the hard part, the part that took everything, kept her eyes on the peddler's eyes and not on the tray of fine red apples, because some instinct screamed that the apples were the whole of it, that to look at them too long was to be looked at in return. "What's your name, grandmother?" A flicker then. the smallest thing. A peddler with an honest name gives it gladly. This one's harmless face went briefly blank, the blankness of a mind reaching for a lie it had not bothered to prepare, because it had not expected to need one. "Esme," the old woman said. "Old Esme, miss. I've come up from the coast road. The coast road's been shut since autumn." Hermione's grip tightened on her wand. Behind her, somewhere in the white morning, she heard the round door of the tree root house open, heard the healer's quick, indrawn breath, heard the old man's voice say one low word, "Inside," and felt, rather than saw, the 7 hidden hearts of the wood begin to move. "There's been no coast road for a season, grandmother. The cliffs came down in a storm. Everyone in this country knows it. Everyone who's been in this country." She took a step backward toward the house, toward the wards, toward the people who loved her. "I'll ask you once more, and then I'll ask you to leave. And if you don't leave, I'll make you. Who are you? And who sent you up an open road into a wood the whole kingdom is afraid of?" For a long moment, the white clearing held its breath. And then the harmless grandmother laughed. A low, rich laugh that had nothing of age in it, nothing of poverty, nothing of harmlessness. A laugh Hermione had never heard and recognized instantly, because it was the laugh she had been hearing in her dreams since she was old enough to know the word mud-blood. And the bent figure straightened, and the stick fell from her hand, suddenly unwithered, and the map of harmless years began to run like wax down a face it had never truly fit. "Clever," said Bellatrix in her own voice now, savouring it, as the borrowed years sloughed away and the dark fever rose back into her eyes. "Oh, clever. The glass was right to fear you. He was right to throw his wand in the grass for you. Yes, I know about the grass, child. I know about the hill. I know about all of it. You'd be amazed what a mirror sees." She smiled, and it was the smile that emptied rooms. "I came all this way, meaning to be gentle. A friendly face, a sweet word, an apple freely given." "I do so like to be invited in. But you won't invite me, will you? You're too clever by half." The smile widened. "It's no matter. I've never needed an invitation. I only enjoy them." "Run, lass!" the old man bellowed, and the wood erupted. What followed, Hermione would never afterward be able to set in order. The 7 came out of the white morning all at once, wands up, and the clearing tore itself apart in light. She saw the old man plant himself between her and the Queen like a tree that had decided where it would die. She saw the healer's hands move faster than thought, weaving a shield around the round green room. She saw the brother and sister finishing each other's spells in a braided ribbon of fire, and the tracker low and fast through the snow, and the maker of small wild magics flinging the wood itself, roots, branches, the very cold, against the thing that had come to take the girl by the fire. And she saw that it was not enough. Bellatrix moved through them the way deep water moves through reeds. She had unmade kingdoms. She had hollowed out her own family for power and found the bargain fair. 7 hidden hearts, who had spent 20 years learning to flee her, were no match for the thing they had been fleeing, and Hermione watched the old man fall. Not dead, she told herself. Not dead, only down. Watched the healer's shield buckle and the braided fire gutter, and understood, with the cold, complete clarity that had kept her alive her whole life. that they were losing, that they were going to lose, that the people who loved her were spending themselves to the last drop, and it was not going to be enough. So she did the only thing there was to do, the thing that was hers to do and no one else's. She stepped out from behind the old man's falling body, out from behind the healer's broken shield, out into the open white clearing, one hand low against the child she carried, and her wand steady in the other. And she said, in a voice that carried across all the torn and smoking snow, "Stop, stop. It's me you came for. Leave them, and you can have me." The clearing went still. Bellatrix turned, and the look on her ruined, beautiful face as she lowered her wand and considered the girl who had just offered herself up to spare 7 strangers was the most terrible thing Hermione had ever seen, because it was not triumph, it was recognition. It was a woman who had spent her whole life learning that everything could be bought, looking at a thing that could not, and hating it with her whole black heart, precisely because she understood it, precisely because she remembered, dimly, from 100 years ago, being someone who might have done the same. "There it is," the Queen breathed. "There's what the glass was afraid of. Not your power, child. That." She gestured at the offered self, the steady wand, the protective hand against the belly. "Love that spends itself. The one currency I never learned to forge." She came closer, slow, and Hermione held her ground, though every screaming animal nerve begged her to run. "You die for them. Strangers. A wood full of rats who took you in out of the rain." Her dark eyes dropped, then to the hand against the belly, and something shifted in them, some new and worse calculation. "And not only for them, I think." Hermione's hand pressed flatter. "Oh," said Bellatrix very softly. "Oh, my boy, my good hand." A laugh shook out of her, delighted, monstrous. "He didn't even know, did he? He threw his wand in the grass and rode home thinking he'd given you a season, and all the while he'd given you—" She could not finish for the awful joy of it. "This is better than killing you. This is so much better. Do you know what comes of love that spends itself, child? Do you know the one poison your clever books never warned you of?" She reached into the fallen peddler's tray and drew out an apple. Red, perfect, the last and finest of the season, and turned it in her unwithered hand so the weak winter light ran across its skin like blood under glass. "The cure is the first kiss of love returned," Bellatrix said, conversational now, almost tender, the way she had once spoken to her mirror. "Love that is given and answered. The very first such kiss, freely exchanged, breaks the sleep and wakes the sleeper. That is the only key." She smiled. "And you, my poor, lonely, mudblood child, hunted your whole life, friendless, nameless, reaching back to a boy on a hill who rode away and never returned. You have never in all your days been loved back, have you? Not truly, not answered. The boy doesn't even know what he made. He cannot kiss you awake from 100 leagues, knowing nothing." She held out the apple. "So I am quite safe, aren't I?" And before Hermione could lift her wand, before the healer could rebuild the shield, before any of the 7 could rise, the Queen flicked her fingers, and the perfect red apple shot across the torn white clearing and pressed itself to the girl's lips. And Hermione's own body betrayed her, her mouth opening on a gasp she could not call back, and the smallest bite of sweetness touched her tongue. and the wand fell from her hand into the snow, and her knees gave, and the white clearing tilted and went dark, and the last thing Hermione Granger felt as she folded down into the cold was her own hand, even now, even falling, even dying, curling protectively around the child beneath her heart. She did not die. That was the cruelty of the apple and its mercy both. It did not kill, it only stopped, holding the dying at the very lip of itself and refusing to let it fall. The 7 who survived the white morning gathered her up out of the bloodied snow, and the healer, weeping and steady at once, pressed her ear to the still chest and to the still belly beneath it, and heard, beneath the silence, 2 faint and stubborn tides. The girl's heart slowed almost past finding, and under it, smaller, quicker, undrowned, the heart of the child she had curled herself around as she fell. Both, the healer breathed, both still here. She held on. Even falling, she held on. Bellatrix did not stay to gloat. That was not her way. She had what she had come for, not a corpse, but something far better, a sleeping monument to her own untouchable supremacy, and a secret to carry home to a boy who thought he had won a season. She melted back into the white wood the way she had come, and the snow closed over her track, and the clearing was left to the broken and the grieving, and the girl who would not wake. They built her the coffin themselves, because they could not bear to put her in the cold ground that her 2 stubborn tides still refused. The maker of small wild magics grew it out of the wood itself over 7 nights. A casket of living crystal, clear as still water, frost-flowered at its edges, that held the cold of preservation and the warmth of being loved at the very same time, so that the girl within neither corrupted nor froze, but only slept, suspended, her hands still curled low against the swell beneath her heart. They set it in the heart of the clearing where the silent boy had first pointed north, and they ringed it with the wards of all 7, and the silent boy began again to leave his flowers, 2 of them every morning on the crystal lid above the place where the 2 faint hearts still beat. And they waited, because the healer had heard what Bellatrix had said before she vanished, and had carried the terrible arithmetic of it back to the others, and they all of them understood the shape of the only hope there was. The cure is the first kiss of love returned, love given and answered. There was, in all the world, exactly 1 person who might have given that kiss. He was 100 leagues north in a black keep, and he did not know she was sleeping, and he did not know she carried his child, and he believed, because he had been told to believe it, that the wolves had her bones. So the old man, mending slowly from the wound that should have killed him, sent the tracker north with a single word folded in a leaf, addressed to no name, because to write the name would be to murder him. And the tracker went through the deep winter by the secret ways toward the 1 person in the world who could wake her, praying he was still alive to be found, praying he would believe, praying he would come. Draco was at the great north window when the leaf reached him, because he was always at the great north window now. He had spent the whole black winter there, telling himself she was hidden, telling himself the trees had grown over her name, telling himself the silence from the south was the silence of a thing successfully saved. The tracker found him by the window, pressed the leaf into his hand, said only, "She is sleeping. The apple, the crystal. The healer says the cure is the first kiss of love returned, and that you are the only one alive who might give it." And then, because the tracker was a kind man and had carried the weight of it 100 leagues, added the rest, the thing the others had argued over sending. "And, my lord, she carries your child. She has all the winter. The healer says it lives." Draco did not make a sound. The mask he had worn his whole life, the cold court stillness, the grey eyes that gave nothing because they had practiced giving nothing. The mask simply was not there anymore. It had not slipped or cracked. It had ceased to exist, the way a thing ceases to exist that was never real. What was left underneath was not composed at all. His knuckles whitened around the leaf until the brittle thing crushed to nothing in his fist, and he made no sound, and his face did the thing that faces do when grief and fury and a wild, impossible hope arrive all at once and have nowhere to go. A child. He had sat in the grass on a green hill and given the only true thing he had ever owned, and he had ridden away, believing he had given her a season, and all the while a child. And his aunt had known. His aunt had stood in this very keep and let him bow and call the girl dead, knowing, smiling, knowing, while she ground the bitter root in the cellar below his sleeping body. She had let him keep his pretty secret, the tracker said the healer said, so that it would be such a comfort to him later to know exactly how thoroughly he had failed. He went south that night. He did not pack. He did not plan. He took a horse from his aunt's own stable and rode it nearly to death and took another, and he crossed in a handful of brutal days the country it had taken him 3 to cross at leisure. And he did not sleep, and he did not eat. And somewhere in the riding, the last of the boy his aunt had made him fell away behind him in the dark and did not follow. He reached the wood at the very end of winter, when the first thaw had begun to rot the snow, and the 7 who were left came out to meet him with their wands lowered, and led him to the heart of the clearing, where the crystal caught the grey light and threw it back. And there she was. She was exactly as he had last seen her. The brown hair, the ink long gone from her cheek, the stubborn jaw gone soft in sleep. And she was changed utterly, because her hand lay curled low against a swell that had not been there on the hill. And he understood, standing over the crystal in the rotting snow, the whole of what the night in the grass had made, the whole of what his mercy had cost and built and nearly lost. He went down on his knees in the snow beside the casket. "I came," he said, to her, to the sleeping silence of her. "I'm sorry it took the winter. I didn't. She let me think." His voice, which had never in his life broken, broke. "I didn't know. About you. About..." His hand spread flat against the crystal above her, curled and protective hand. "About him. About either of you. If I'd known, I'd have. There's no road I wouldn't have." He stopped. There were no words his life had given him for this. He had never been taught any. "Wake up," he said, simpler than he had ever said anything. "Please, I'm here. Wake up." The healer touched his shoulder. "It must be a kiss," she said gently. "Love given and answered. The first such between you. It's the only key there is." So he bent and lifted the crystal lid that opened for love and only for love, and looked for one long breath at the face he had crossed 2 countries and the wreck of his whole self to reach, and he kissed her. He kissed her with everything he was, with the truth he had never been allowed to say out loud, with the season he had thought he was buying, and the child he had never known he'd made, and the cold high winters at the north window, and the wand thrown into the gorse on a green hill. He put all of it into the kiss, every true thing his lying life had hidden, and he waited for the crystal to break, and the cold to lift, and the brown eyes to open. Nothing happened. He drew back. He looked at her. The two faint tides beat on beneath the stillness, slow and small, unwoken. He kissed her again, desperate now, and again, and the healer's hand tightened on his shoulder, and the old man bowed his great head, and Draco understood, the way he had understood on the hill that he could not kill her as a matter of fact and not of will, that it was not working, that he was too late, that 100 leagues and a whole black winter of lies had cost him the thing the cure required, and that he had crossed 2 countries to fail at the one act that mattered, exactly as his aunt had promised he would. "No," he said. "No, it has to—" He turned to the healer, and his composure was gone past even the gone it had already gone to. "Tell me there's another way. There's always another way. Tell me what it costs and I'll pay it. Tell me." The healer looked at him for a long, sorrowing moment. And then, because she was the kind of person who gave the truth even when it was the worst medicine, she told him. "There is one other way," she said. "The poison wants love that is given and answered. The kiss is only the gentlest form of it, love offered and received in the same breath. But there is an older form and a harsher one, a life given freely and received. If one who loves her pours his own life across the boundary, not taken from him, but given, fully, knowing, the poison will accept it in the kiss's place. It will wake her. It will wake the child." Her voice did not waver, though her eyes streamed. "But it does not share the cost. The one who gives it does not wake. There is no half measure in it. A life for a life. Hers and the little one's. For yours." Draco was already moving. He did not hesitate. That was the thing the old man would speak of after in the years that came. That the Queen's own hand, raised on a currency of fear, who had spent his whole life calculating every cost before he paid the smallest coin, knelt in the rotting snow and was told the price of her waking, and paid it without one heartbeat's pause, the way you pay for the only thing you have ever wanted, which is to say, without counting at all. "Tell me what to do," he said. "Draco, tell me what to do." So she told him. And he gathered the sleeping girl up out of the crystal into his arms, her and the child she carried, and he held her against his chest the way the old man had once held her up out of the rain, and he pressed his lips to her cold brow, and he gave it, all of it, the whole of the life that had begun as a blade and ended here in the rotting snow, as something his aunt had never managed to forge in him and never understood, a thing that spends itself. He poured it across the boundary between them, his life into her stillness, and he felt the cold begin to lift from her, even as it climbed into him, felt the slow tide of her heart quicken under his hand, even as his own began to slow. And the last thing Draco Malfoy thought, as the grey light dimmed at the edges and her brown eyes fluttered, beginning at last to open against his shoulder, was that it had been worth it, every league of it, that he had finally, in the end, not failed her. Hermione woke into warmth and the smell of thaw, and for one suspended breath, she did not know that anything was wrong, because the first thing she felt was that she was held. Then she felt the second thing. The arms around her had begun to loosen. Her eyes came fully open onto a face a hand's breadth from her own. Grey eyes, frost-pale hair, a long-heeled scar she had given him on a green hill a lifetime ago. And her whole drowned mind surfaced at once into the impossible fact of him, here, holding her, and then into the far worse fact written across that beloved guarded face, which was no longer guarded at all and no longer afraid, and going, even as she watched, somewhere she could not follow. Draco. His name in her mouth, the name she had cried out through a winter of sleep without knowing she cried it. You came. You came back. There you are, he said. His voice was very far away already, and full of a peace she had never heard in it. There you are. I was beginning to think you'd sleep through the whole of spring. His hand found hers where it lay curled, even now, even waking, low against the swell beneath her heart, and his fingers folded over it, over both of them. He's here, he said wonderingly, as though it were the only news in all the world. He's still here, the little one. The healer said, I didn't know. I'd never have left you, I swear it, if I'd known about Draco. The Thor light tilted. The arms around her were not holding her up anymore. She was holding him. Why are you cold? Why are you getting cold? What did you do? She understood it the way she understood everything. Too quickly, too clearly, the cleverness that had kept her alive turning on her now to show her the one thing she could not bear to see. What did you give? The kiss didn't work. Why didn't the kiss work? And what did you give instead? Draco. Look at me. What did you do? The only thing there was to do, he said, and smiled. And it was the smile of a man who has, for the first and last time, no mask left to wear and no reason to want one. It's a fair bargain, the best I ever made, the only good one. His eyes were drifting closed. Don't waste it. You hear me? That's all Don't you dare waste it. Live. Both of you. Live and... His hand went slack in hers. The grey eyes closed. The breath that had grown so shallow simply stopped between one of hers and the next, the way the wind drops before rain, and the weight of him changed in her arms from the weight of a living thing to the other weight, the one she had spent her whole life learning to read, and the warmth that had poured out of him into her was gone entirely, and Draco Malfoy was dead in her lap in the rotting snow, having spent the whole of himself to wake her, exactly as the bargain demanded, with no half measure in it. Hermione did not scream. The scream was too large for screaming. It came out of her as a single broken sound, and then as silence, and she bent over him with her brown hair falling around them both, like a curtain drawn against the world, and she held the cooling body of the boy who had thrown his wand into the gorse, and she rocked, and the 7 who were left stood in a ring around her in the thaw and wept and could do nothing, because there was nothing to be done. A life for a life, hers and the child's, for his. He had read the terms and paid them without counting, and the terms did not refund. You stupid, she wept into his still chest. You stupid, brave, stupid. I was going to tell you. Do you understand? I had it all planned. I was going to find you when it was over, when she was dust. I was going to put him in your arms and watch your face and tell you, this is what your mercy made. And you weren't supposed to. You were supposed to be there for it. Her hands fisted in the front of his coat. Wake up. I woke up. You can wake up. Somebody, there has to be. She lifted her streaming face to the healer. There has to be another way back. There's always, you said yourself, there's always another. There isn't, child. The healer was on her knees in the snow beside them, her own face wet. Not for this. He gave it freely, and freely given. It doesn't return. That's what makes it work. That's what makes it count. She reached out and closed the grey eyes with 2 gentle fingers. He knew. He knew when he asked me how. And he didn't pause, Hermione. Not for one breath. I have lived a long life, and I have never seen anyone pay so dear a price so gladly. And Hermione, with the child quickening under her heart, woken by the death of its father, knelt in the snow and held the boy who had bought her 2 lives with his one, and grieved as she had never let herself grieve for anything, because she had never before had anything worth grieving like this. They buried him at the heart of the clearing where the crystal had stood, where the silent boy had first pointed north. The thaw became spring while the child grew, and the spring became summer, and the wood that had hidden Hermione hid her still, and the 7 who loved her closed around her grief the way they had once closed around her flight, and would not let her be alone inside it. She did not laugh by the fire that season, but she lived. She had been ordered to by the last words of the only person who had ever loved her and been loved back. And she was a girl who had survived her whole life by doing the hard necessary thing. And so she did this hardest one. She lived. For both of them. For all 3. The child came at the turn of summer into autumn, in the round green room where Hermione had first woken into warmth a year before. A son. He came easily, and he came loud, and when the healer laid him red and furious on his mother's breast, Hermione looked down through her tears at the small, crumpled face and saw, already, unmistakably, the frost-pale wisp of hair and the slate-grey eyes that would never once look at her with a guarded stranger's caution, but only ever with this open, undefended, fearless need. "Draco," she said, "to the baby, to the name, to the grave at the heart of the clearing. His name is Draco, after his father, the father who gave us both our lives." And when the boy was a week old and strong enough to be carried out into the autumn air, Hermione wrapped him in the wood smoke and lavender wool and carried him out across the clearing to the grave at its heart, the 7 following at a distance. And she knelt down in the turning leaves beside the mound where they had laid his father. And she did the thing she had planned in the dark of a winter that felt 1,000 years ago. She laid the child down upon the grave, upon the cold earth above the cold body of the boy who had spent himself so that this small, loud life could exist at all. "Here," she said, the way she had always meant to say it, though never like this, never to a grave. "Here. This is what came of the night you wouldn't kill me. This is what your mercy made. I told you I'd find you and put him in your arms and watch your face." Her tears fell onto the leaves. "I'm sorry, I'm too late for your face, but I kept the rest of it. Here he is. Here we both are. Look." And the child, lying on his father's grave, turned his small grey eyes up toward his mother and his crumpled mouth toward the warmth beneath him, and reached out one tiny, perfect hand and pressed it flat against the cold earth. Love, given and offered, freely, without counting, the way his father had given it, the way the poison had always required and never received in time. And the earth grew warm beneath the small hand. Hermione felt it before she understood it. The cold mound under her knees, warming, the autumn leaves stirring without wind. And then a sound from the heart of the grave, the most impossible sound in all the world. A slow tide, faint, beginning, the way a heart begins when a life is poured back across a boundary that love has finally paid in full. Because the poison had wanted the first kiss of love returned, and Bellatrix had been wrong about everything except the rule itself. The cure had failed under the crystal, not because the love wasn't there, but because the kiss in the snow had not been the first. There had been a first, long before, on a green hill, in the long gold hours before the horns, when a boy who had come to kill her sat down in the grass instead, and they had reached for each other, and that kiss, freely given and freely answered, had already been spent. The crystal's cure had no power, because the magic had already been used. And the older, harsher form, the life for a life, that had only ever been the long way round to the same place. Love given and answered, completed at last, not by any kiss, but by the existence of the child born of the first one, the living proof, the small grey-eyed hand pressed warm against his father's grave, closing the circle backward, paying the debt that had stood unpaid since a green hill a lifetime ago. The earth opened gently, the way the crystal lid had opened, for love, and only for love. And Draco Malfoy drew breath and opened his eyes onto the autumn sky, and the first thing he saw was his son's small hand pressed against his chest, and the second thing was Hermione's face bending down over him, with the brown hair falling around them both like a curtain drawn open at last upon the world. Far to the north, in the highest chamber of a black keep, an enchanted glass that had never once lied, looked at the only thing it could not have foreseen, a life given and returned, a circle that ran the wrong way, a love completed by the small warm hand of a child born of the first kiss of all, and the cold pale light at its heart guttered and went out, and the silver thorns of its frame crumbled to rust, and the mirror cracked from edge to edge with a sound like a kingdom ending. And in the chamber, the queen who fed on fear and had never learned to forge the one currency that mattered, turned to ask her glass, who now remained her enemy on this earth, and found only her own broken face in 1,000 falling pieces, asking the empty air. But that was far away, and it did not matter, and Hermione did not see it. She saw only the grey eyes open beneath her, and the wonder in them, and the small, loud son between them with his hand on his father's living heart. She bent the last of the distance down into the autumn light, into the warm and breathing truth of him, and she kissed him. Not to break a curse, for the curse was broken, and not to wake him, for he was awake, but only because she loved him, and was loved, and could, at last, with nothing in all the world left to cost them, simply do the thing she wanted. "You came back," she whispered against his mouth. "You called me," he said, and reached up with the hand that was warm again, and gathered his whole family into his arms in the turning leaves, and did not let go.
So that was the story I wanted to tell you, why I wrote it. It looks like a fairy tale, a queen, a mirror, a poisoned apple, a sleeping girl. You know this story, you heard it as a child, but I changed one thing, and that one thing is everything. The kiss did not work. Think about that. He came back, he found her, he kissed her, and nothing happened. Why? Because the magic said it must be the first kiss of love, and they had already kissed long ago on a green hill before they even knew it was love. I love this idea. He is why he always waits for the big moment, the perfect moment, the moment that fixes everything. But sometimes the real moment already happened, quietly, when we were not paying attention, when we did not even know it mattered. He sat down in the grass next to a girl he was sent to kill, and he just took it. That was it. That was the first kiss, not the magic one of the end, the small one in the grass they, that they both almost forgot. Their love was never missing, they just did not see it. I think this is true for us too. Maybe the most important thing in your life already happened, a small thing, a quiet moment, a person who sat down next to you and just stayed. Do not wait to the big keys. Look at that you already have. That is the whole story. Thank you for listening. Stay with me. The next one is coming.